Hello everyone, welcome again to the channel. Today I want to share with you this story I saw. It's about the US pledges 55 million for Afghanistan aid, but sanctions remain. If you are not aware, there was an earthquake in Afghanistan and about 1,000 people died. And just recently, several countries pledged to help, including China, as far as I know. And recently, the US says they were going to send 55 million to help, but at the same time, they are refusing to remove all the sanctions on the Afghanistan government. So the US has frozen about 9,500 million in Afghan central bank reserves as the country is facing massive food shortages. A United Nations official said in March that malnutrition and food insecurity threaten an entire generation in Afghanistan. So while at the same time, they are making all this big scandal, international scandal about food insecurity in the world because Ukraine is unable to export their grain, and they blame it on Russia, and they say that the problem is that Russia is not allowing the grain to leave and everything else, while it is true that the Ukrainian government has mined their ports, so that's why the ships cannot leave. Regardless of all that, they still are purposefully creating food insecurity for Afghanistan, and they are refusing to release the funds that are their own funds. The Afghanistan government did nothing. Even from the start, they did absolutely nothing that will grant all these sanctions, but they still did it and they continue to do it. And their only fault is that they refuse to accept the US imposed government. Despite the dire situation, the US refuses to release the fund, and this is the biggest stupidity of all this. In February, President Biden announced a plan to make half of the $7 billion in Afghan reserves held by the US Federal Reserve available for the families of 9/11 victims, despite the fact that the Afghan people had nothing to do with the attacks. On top of the frozen reserves, the US maintained sanctions on the Taliban, and the sanctions discouraged international banks and companies from doing business with the country. Why? What is the justification for this, They say the Taliban's control of Afghanistan is complicating humanitarian aid deliveries because of excessive diligence from international financial systems that want to make sure they don't violate the sanctions. So what did the Taliban did that it was so terrible to get all these sanctions, Let's take a look here in this article. Is sanctions against Afghanistan from Wikipedia. So I'm just going to highlight a few things. It says the United Nations sanctions were designed to prevent the Taliban from supporting and conducting acts of international terrorism, which the Taliban never conducted any acts of international terrorism. It's already been established. So there was this United Nations sanctions, which is the resolution 1267. The reason for imposing the sanction was for Taliban refusing to surrender Osama bin Laden to stand trial in the US for the embassy bombings. And this is what happened, Like in the context, the Taliban refused all these requests. Instead, they offered to extradite Osama bin Laden to an Islamic country for trial under Islamic law if the United States presented evidence of his guilt. They didn't provide evidence, so they were proposing a legal solution to this, and instead they invaded the country. So they did it because they have the power, and they have the power over the United Nations, so the United Nations confabulated with them to make it legal, and they did it. In addition, the Security Council strongly condemned training and planning of terrorist acts and reiterated deep concern of terrorist activities as well as violations of international humanitarian laws and of human rights, in particular discrimination against women and girls. And this is just a sham. They are just saying that they have problems with human rights of women and girls. What about Saudi Arabia? No, Saudi Arabia is an ally of the United States, and they continue to abuse the human rights of women and girls. So when have they invaded Saudi Arabia? Or when have they imposed sanctions on Saudi Arabia? So it's just hypocritical, completely hypocritical of this. And they continue to do it for no good reason. It's just absolutely stupid. So the asset freeze was to ensure that no funds, financial assets, or economic resources were available to Al-Qaeda or any individual connected to the organization. That was when they started the sanctions, But they were not part of this. And some of these resolutions were enforced after the events of 9/11 aimed at the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. The Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. It's already been established. See, the goals of Resolution 1267 was to coerce the Taliban to hand over Osama bin Laden to U.S. authorities to answer to criminal charges over the bombing of 2 U.S. embassies in East Africa and to prevent the Taliban and Al-Qaeda from conducting international acts of terrorism. Instead of following legal proceedings, they invade the country, and they start imposing sanctions instead of following the legal ways to do it. Even for 9/11, I'm going to highlight some things here. Hold on just one second. This is from Osama bin Laden. Immediately after September 11, bin Laden praised the attacks but denied responsibility for them. He says, "I stress that I have not carried out this act, which appears to have been carried out by individuals with their own motivation. I have already said that I'm not involved in the attacks, in the September 11 attacks in the United States. As a Muslim, I try my best to avoid telling a lie. I had no knowledge of these attacks, nor do I consider the killing of innocent women and children and other humans as an appreciable act." And then there was an interview, and he says, "If inciting people to do that is terrorism, and if killing those who kill our sons is terrorism, then let history be witness that we are terrorists. We will work to continue this battle, God permitting, until victory or until we meet God before that occurs." So he never admitted directly that he was doing this, and even if these attacks on the embassies or the USS Cole happened, he was not attacking civilians. He was never attacking civilians. He was attacking military groups. Like the USS Cole was a military vessel, and the US embassies are considered maybe military targets by him, but they never attack what they call innocent people. So it is this is back to the same statement I already said, that the Taliban was doing something completely legal. They were refusing to hand over or extradite Osama bin Laden without proof. But anyway, it doesn't matter, because they are continue to do whatever they want, because they have the power to do it. And now we see this humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. Even before the earthquake was still very, very difficult, and they still don't do it. So this is how hypocritical the West is, including the UK. The UK also has sanctions on Afghanistan. I don't know which other countries have sanctions, but at least the United States and the UK, they have these sanctions in place. So that's all I wanted to say for now. And as always, I ask you to please like the video, share it in social media, and subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you again very soon. Thank you for watching.